Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have people logging in from all across the globe. Thank you so much for joining this session hosted by Bero. My name is Shakti Prasad. I am the head of content at Bero, and I run the Procurement Espresso magazine. I welcome you all to the Espresso live session titled Procurement and Finance Collaboration, the Road to Profitability. Before I get started with the session, just a few housekeeping rules to be kept in mind. All the participants will be on listen-only mode for the entire duration of the webinar. We will take up the questions at the end of the presentation, but we would encourage our attendees to key in their questions or clarifications anytime during the session. Please type them into the question box given in your control panel. There could be a lag of a few seconds in between the transition of slides, so please bear with us. If you have any difficulty in joining the webinar, please try to log back in or key in your queries in the Q&A box, and we will try to help you. In case, for example, if the video is not functioning or if the audio is spotty, we would request you to log out and then log back in, and hopefully that should work. Now, I'm happy to introduce Anna Konoplinikova, Group Head of Procurement and Finance at the Middle Eastern luxury retailer Chalhoub Group. She joins us from Dubai. Hope you all can see Anna on your screens. Anna's team. Hi, Anna. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah. So Anna's team focuses on high-value, non-merchandise spend categories. She was recently promoted. She was also promoted to head the operations finance team, and this is a bit rare because you often don't see the head of procurement also heading the operational finance. We'll come to that later. So Anna has nearly 2 decades of procurement and finance experience. So prior to joining Chalhoub, she had worked with Coca-Cola, Hellenic, and Amazon. She graduated from the famous London School of Economics, the LSE, and she is also a qualified chartered accountant. Hence, she is no stranger to the world of finance. Thank you so much for joining the session today, Anna.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, okay. Next slide, please. So Anna, for the benefit of audience, so why don't you please give us a brief overview of the procurement operations at Chalhoub, and also, regarding your recent promotion, you have been recently promoted to head the finance team also. So can you also tell us the backstory as to why the company entrusted you with that responsibility too?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So as a procurement function in Chalhoub, again, it's a fairly recent team. We are about 3 years old. Our focus is primarily on what we call non-merchandise, which is indirect spend. The key categories that we manage is tech, marketing, logistics, fit out, facility management, and so on. So we are a team of 8 people. We grew from 0 3 years ago, and our priority has, from the beginning, was a focus on a strategic category management. For this, we also use as a backbone of in terms of our digitalization journey, the spend analytics tool, as well as we do now have an automated source to contract process. The next step for us in terms of when it comes to procurement is also streamlining and automating the procure to pay part of the process, which is still yet to be quite fragmented, I would say. When it comes to the finance, actually from January, I also managed the highly capable team of finance business partners to our operational verticals, which is primarily very much similar to the spend that we manage. It is technology, logistics, data and analytics, and accounting. right? So there is a lot of synergies between actually procurement and finance, which some of them we'll discuss during this call. And that was actually one of the reasons why I accepted this challenge, in order to give a little bit more understanding even to the executive team that these two functions, actually the best benefit out of it is actually when they work together. Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do at the moment.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent, Anna, because one of the main reasons why we are doing this webinar today is to drive home the point that procurement does play a very influential role in driving a company's profitability. There are several financial metrics, ratios, so to speak, that procurement has a huge influence on. So even though as a function, procurement does not really think or focus much about finance, at the operational level, that is. But it's important that the function as a whole, professionals, be it the category managers or the directors, that they are aware that the job that they are doing is directly helping the company to create shareholder value. In fact, we have been running several campaigns. We do Bureau, that is, releases this annual best in class rankings that ranks companies based on these financial ratios, that procurement plays an outsized influence, and then those companies tend to create shareholder value. Anyway, so that is a long story short. That is, procurement does play a very key role in driving a company's profitability. So this session is basically to drive awareness among the general procurement community that you don't have to really shy away from owning some of the financial successes that your company does record in the market. Okay, so next slide, please. Yes, so this is something very interesting that came up, during my early discussions with Anna. So one of the, of course, it's a very well documented case that procurement does not really focus much on finance. Obviously, you're a very operational role. At an operational role, why would you think about what the finance people think about procurement? But then at a strategic role, especially at Anna's level, at a CPO level and VP level, it is important what the finance thinks. So Anna, you did mention that procurement's understanding of finance is very important, but then the problem is there is a differing perception between finance and procurement as to what finance is, and that can cause misunderstanding. So can you explain that?
Yeah, so exactly for what you said, actually, I would really strongly encourage for any procurement professional and whatever level to have at least basic understanding of finance, because this is, in my view, a very crucial element of knowledge and the skills that procurement professionals must have while speaking to the suppliers, building the relationship with the stakeholders, because that's I mean, finance is a living breath of blood of the organization, right? So, and understanding it is a kind of crucial to the success, in any level. So yeah, I would really strongly encourage whoever hasn't done, at least do basic finance for non-finance, just to understand what it means. So actually, I think everyone on the call, I mean, at least once in their career been in this situation when speaking to finance and primarily about savings, having a complete misunderstanding on what you believe that you deliver to the organization, while finance either doesn't see it like this, but most likely doesn't see it at all. And in my practice, what I've seen is actually a lot of it comes from misalignment of the languages that we speak as procurement and finance, as well as the fact that we measure really different things. Like, just to give you an example, first of all, terminology, right? How we usually as a procurement think. We think in terms of categories. There is even before in my introduction, I said we manage tech category, we manage finance, we need marketing category, facility management category, and so on, right? So while it's very useful for procurement, the point is that no one else in the organization thinks about spend like this, right? It's absolutely irrelevant. So when we talk about tech spend for finance, it doesn't mean anything. Actually, and therefore, in order for us to be successful in terms of our stakeholder alignment and making other stakeholders appreciate the value of procurement, we first of all need to align the terminology, right? So how usually finance thinks? Finance thinks about capital expenditure, OPEX, operational expenditure. We have also one-off spend. We have a recurring spend. All this, while procurement does enormous work in all these buckets, when it comes to finance, the only thing that actually finance can see is the bucket of the operating, when we are working on operating expenditure, and which is recurring. Say we're renegotiating the existing facility management contract. If we renegotiate the rate, this is what hits your bottom line, and there is a hope or chance, we'll look at it later, that finance will see this impact. Okay, the rest, when it comes to the cost avoidance, and cost avoidance usually is happening when you have a one-off. It can be extremely material spend, but this if it's one-off and there is no reliable reference, like for example prior year agreement. For finance, these are just numbers, right? They don't mean much, and this is our responsibility to educate what it means, what impact this cost avoidance could have had the procurement didn't do the job, or the working capital improvements that we will talk about later. Again, they don't directly impact the bottom line, but again, it is for on the procurement to speak the same language as a finance and educate them on these kind of things, on what work is done on this. But then even if we look, say, on obvious bucket that is seen, for example, the operating expenditure that hits your bottom line, we as a procurement, we are very proud, say, for example, we renegotiate the contract, we deliver a rate reduction that, in our view, based on our calculation, results in, say, 500 million savings, right? There is a high chance this 500 million will not reflect on the bottom line, even if it's a P&L items. And the reason being behind it is that there are many other factors which might be outside of the procurement control that will affect this procurement savings, right? Like, I'll give you a very classical example. It can be volume, right? If we buy less or more, the total spend will change, or currency, or the market fluctuation if it's a commodity driven. For me, for example, currency. If you are a procurement professional in Egypt and your company generates revenues in Egyptian pounds, well, you negotiated 50% reduction in the, I don't know, 20% reduction in the rate, but on a USD denominated contract, no matter what reduction it is, the denomination in Egyptian pound will eat up all your savings. Which means that, again, yeah, you will have a very tough discussion with finance, and that's kind of logical. And again, that's goes back to my point that unless we as a procurement professionals take initiative and educate the finance, exactly explaining where procurement does have an influence, where procurement does not have an influence, the more transparent we are and the earlier in the process we involve finance, the easier then will be this discussion on how much value and what is procurement contribution on the bottom line.
Okay, so you suggesting that it's better to get the terminologies right and the agreement in place right at the beginning of the financial year, rather
Absolutely.
than arguing about it at the end of the quarter or end of the year.
It's even better when you have put your business plans together for the next year, the budgets, and you have a certain savings commitment. Get finance to validate this savings, meaning that, and have this discussion upfront, saying, look, we're talking about procurement savings. This is, I know, volume neutral, currency neutral, market neutral, and get the finance buy-in from the beginning. So when the fluctuation happens, you say, right, this is because of this, or this is because of that, and then the discussion is much easier.
Okay, that's great. Moving on, next slide, please. Yeah, so collaboration is very important, especially between procurement and finance. So Anna, what role does each team play, say procurement and finance? What role does each of these teams play in achieving this goal, that is to drive profitability? And importantly, how can they support each other in the process?
I think there is multiple ways, obviously, and even building on what we said before, right? The whole discussion about the terminology, the same language, is essentially the purpose is that both parties are focused on the same goal. And what is the same goal? Is the same goal is actual value and cost saving that we deliver, right? So the realized, for example, put savings, yeah, and there to deliver. This is essentially from realized savings in simplistic terms is essentially maximized procurement savings that are reflected in your bottom line, right? So, and the way you do it, and as long as the two parties, this is essentially for me what I call the forward-looking approach, yeah, the forecast. It's also the forecasting, right? So when finance owns the whole financial process and the financial statements and the governance around this, procurement is the one who owns the pricing, who owns the contracts, who owns the supplier relationship. Therefore, it's only logical that procurement gets very closely involved, particularly when in budgeting and the forecasting, and do it jointly with the finance. That's essentially will bring to much more credible figures because there will be bottom up. There will be much more trust between procurement and finance. Finance, at the same time, we can actively, proactively actually flag the additional savings opportunity that might arise during the year if we monitor the very transparently the buckets that are affecting our spend, as well as while having this continuous dialogue, it will also help the commercial teams through finance to have much more relevant input on the end product pricing and the retail pricing, right? Which is again is essentially combination of your cost plus a certain margin.
Okay, so communication is key, not only with the finance team, but also with your commercial sales team. If there are changes in the markets, say in the procurement on the supplier side, it's important for you to transmit it across organization, right? Because if the communication breaks down.
No, it's not only changes, but it's also opportunities because your suppliers, your best partners, right? There might be some opportunities that's in terms of innovations or savings that supplier can bring on the table. And the faster we get, if this gets absorbed by the commercial, by finance, the faster you will see its impact on the profitability.
Okay, that's great. Moving on, next slide, please. Yeah, working capital management again is at the heart of, I would say, financial operation. In fact, it's some people might be thinking, why are we even discussing this in a procurement webinar? But then it's quite intertwined, more than what people think. So, Anna, how can procurement and finance team, work together to improve working capital management, and what strategies can be used to optimize cash flow and reduce the need for working capital? And especially when the cash flow is tight, this can come in really handy. And basically, how can procurement contribute to these efforts? How can they help the finance team in better manage the working capital?
Okay, so this is a $1 million free cash flow question, I would say. So again, I think before we discuss how we can work together and what we need to do together and help each other on this, first of all, we need to begin mindful on what I mentioned before, mindful on the terminology, because it's not very obvious. For finance, working capital is a formula. Okay, it's a balances in your inventory balances, accounts receivable balances, taken minus accounts payable balances, right? For procurement, these are the supplier contracts, right? They will particularly take the payment terms, right? And there is a gap. There might be a gap. Very seldom in practice the two the balances of accounts, say payable versus your payment terms, they actually they go hand in hand. There is always a lag, either one way or another. Say, for example, if your accounts payable process, which we discuss later, doesn't work well, you already in a way have a direct immediate, it's like a one-off short-termistic opportunistic point, but you will have a working capital improvement, right? Because you're delaying your payments, right? It was and this needs to be taken into account. But yes, in the long term, strategic term, the way to work is for procurement to be very mindful on the strategic priorities, which is essentially coming from finance. And why I mean that yes, we can improve the working capital, but it should not come at the expense of the cost, right? Because we may actually, although the working capital, again, this is not, does not reflect directly on the bottom line, right? It's a balance sheet items. So there is obviously there is an indirect impact, but still there is a time lag behind it. While if you overdo and stretch your suppliers too much on their accounts payable, on your payment terms, you might have a very direct and very immediate hit on your cost. And same with, say, being not efficient on your accounts payable, you will have directly the, sort of penalties coming, additional penalties or cost increases that are coming towards your way. So really looking at the priorities, thinking outside the box, what other alternatives can be done in order to improve your working capital, and managing the impact together.
Okay. Is this I mean, do you discuss this working capital management regularly with your finance team? I mean, is it part of your regular discussion?
Yes, but I would say it's on and off, right? This
On
is
and
very
off.
much also depends on their cycle, I would say, or which cycle you are, right? Again, and it will be very different for different companies, right? There is say in recession, retail company, the working capital in any company, probably the working capital management becomes of utmost importance. When you on a high level of growth, there is a lot of investment coming. The key point is sell, increase your bottom line. The working capital might not be such a big discussion, as well as it also comes to the discussion of what is the cost of capital. It might be easier for you and much cheaper for you to borrow if we've been how we've seen for the last decade. When the cost of financing is very cheap versus what you can achieve by reducing your costs.
Yeah, that's correct. I think with the interest rate going up, the cycle is moving. It becomes all the more
Yes,
important, right? Yeah.
obviously, absolutely. Now it's becoming more and more important for everyone across the world.
Do you see that happening within the industry, Anna? Because with interest rates
Yes,
going up,
absolutely. Yes, I think
emphasis being placed on.
absolutely. The cost of financing is becoming very expensive. It's becoming expensive for everyone. So it's definitely one of the points where more and more organizations taking much closer look at.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so moving on, next slide, please. But meanwhile, dear audience, if you have any questions or clarifications, if you even your thoughts or experience, please feel free to post it in the Q&A box, and I will read them out for you. Okay. So now coming to accounts payable, I think this is something which all the procurement folks would recognize it immediately. Again, collaboration with finance team to manage AP is very important. So what processes can be used, Anna, to streamline payments? Because even in this age of P2P, there have been many instances where the payments do break down because the chain breaks down. So and of course, more importantly, reduce the risk of late or missed payments, because obviously this can in a way directly impact the profitability, right? So
Look, I think AP is obviously is a critical element of the working capital. It does, and it does have significant impact on profitability. Again, what I mentioned, most likely in terms of the increased, in the form of the increased purchase prices or penalties. It doesn't come unnoticed. There is no free breakfast, right? So, it's, I mean, even if you say have a fantastic contract now and you're again for very opportunistic short-term reason delaying the payments, it's almost guaranteed that the next negotiations, the cost of goods or services will increase, or this fantastic late penalty clause will be again brought back in the contract, right? And that's again one of the reasons where one of the issues between finance and procurement, because usually the finance will delay the payment and procurement then will explain, will start explaining to the supplier why the payments are delayed. So again, even in this case, it's very, very important to work together, right? Even not to be blindsided, for procurement not to be blindsided if there is even this short-termistic, in a way short-sighted need to do that, yeah. But then overall, I believe what I noticed, if it's not intentional, the problem of the sort of the accounts payable is a downstream of P2P, right, as well as the supplier payments, right? And usually any issues there, they are caused by the issues which are coming from upstream. I mean, upstream meaning your triple match doesn't work very well. Either the master data is not updated, or whether it's vendor, whether it's article, either the PO is raised too late or not raised as well, goods and services are not receipted, and so on. So any of these elements, as long as you don't have a automatic triple match, will automatically delay the process. Accounting will need to start investigation, which means procurement will need to start investigation, and so on and so forth. And inevitably, there is a high risk of either overdue payments or the overall process being delayed. So therefore, although finance in a way as a holder of their governance around the processes, it's procurement plays, I would say, has absolute unique position in the organization to provide finance this visibility on the full picture. Because what I've noticed, finance doesn't have this visibility that, okay, what they see is the invoices not being paid on time, right? There is usually not a very good understanding what causes all this, all the factors that leads towards this, because this is just a consequence. So procurement, I mean, I think it's one of the, if the process is broken, which has a ripple effect on everything, not only profitability, is a shining moment for the procurement and this organization to step up and help to fix this, because procurement does have this 360 degrees overview of the process and can really create a lot of value to their, not only to finance, but overall to the organization.
Okay. There is also this. Of course, we didn't touch inventory specifically here. So, do you have any thoughts on inventory as such? Because inventory, I know you don't manage inventory because you do non-merchandise, but in general, procurement, in many companies, procurement does play a role, right? So, any thoughts on that?
Again, it's when it comes to the inventory, I think it's pretty much the same, right? I mean, it's the most important thing is to have up-to-date forecasting, to work together to increase your forecasting accuracy, to ensure that your inventory turns around quickly, that you don't have an obsolete inventory, which is again, it's basically your money being basically held back in something which is very illiquid. So I mean, the general notion is still the same, unless you work very closely with your planners and supply chain planners, or whoever does the forecasting, and your commercial teams, which will give you as much as possible visibility as early as possible. It will have an impact on your working capital, and will make procurement life very difficult.
Okay, so how important is demand forecasting, Anna? Because you mentioned it, especially now, because it's very volatile. You can see the PMI numbers. The manufacturing, pretty much in the Western world, is in recession. The last 6 months, it's reading below 50. So predicting the demand becomes all the more difficult, right? And a lot of companies are sitting on like mountain loads of inventory. That's why I'm touching upon this point. So in this kind of environment, what kind of demand forecasting do you recommend in terms of techniques, in terms of say anticipating what the demand would be, and then passing that information to the commercial team,
it's
and
more
then
it's
working
a
with suppliers.
collaborative, it's a collaborative forward-looking approach, right, that we discussed before. So it needs to be essentially not predicting what happened in the past. Yes, the past figures might be a very good kind of measure, but it doesn't mean anything, because again, when it is a recession, the forward-looking, the reflection of the current trends and what deviations on the market is much more important. And that's only done in terms of the when it comes to good collaborative forecasting.
Okay. Moving on. Next slide, please. Okay, so procurement now is beginning to play a big role in supply chain finance. There's been a lot of companies. I know at least a couple of companies where procurement kind of took this up, led the project, and signed up with the banks and arranging finance for the suppliers. So it's a very simple diagram out there. I mean, this is by no means comprehensive. It's a very simple diagram that explains the mechanics behind supply chain finance. So Anna, would you like to take a stab at it? I mean, for the uninitiated, what it is and how it works.
Okay, so I will try to explain it in very simple terms, and hopefully, there are different deviations, there are different sort of derivatives of this process.
Yes.
But what it essentially means is, at the time when we cannot kind of push suppliers anymore on the payment terms, we need to think outside the box, and obviously finance people and especially bankers, being very imaginative, came up with another product which is helps procurement and the organizations achieve something that would be very difficult to achieve through the normal negotiations. So essentially you have three parties. You have a supplier. In this scheme you have supplier, you have buyer yourselves, and say, for example, bank institution. The financial institution has the luxury, depending on the buyer's organization credit rating, financial institution can offer to the suppliers early access to the funds, to the invoice payments, with the deduction of a small commission. And this commission is usually determined by the credit rating of the buyer's organization, not of the supplier's organization. Okay. So when it comes to the flow of the sort of the chain of the events, based on the fact that bank gives supplier early access to the funds, usually procurement, the buyers in the organization, they use it as a leverage to negotiate extended payment terms. Say, for example, before you were working on 30 days, you extended to, I don't know, say 120 days, which is challenging, but nevertheless, some organizations will be able to achieve. In this new scheme, what you will have, the supplier will send the invoice to the buyer. It's usually like a common platform, but that also the bank has access to. Buyer's organization approves this invoice. I mean that there is no dispute on that. As soon as this invoice approved, the supplier through the banker's platform has access and has right to get paid through the bank for this invoice, even if it's say day 2 or day 3 of the payment terms, right? Then if they exercise this right, bank will release the payments for the invoice minus the commission. Okay, so what will supplier will lose? Supplier essentially will not will not get the full payment. There will be certain commission deduction on the 120th day of on the due date of the invoice. Then the buyer's organization will settle the accounts payable, the invoice, directly with the bank. So supplier is already out of this picture. Yeah? So it's in a way a triangle between supplier, buyer, and the bank. So advantages for the buyer organization is extended improvement in the working capital. For the supplier, despite the fact of 120 days or whatever extension, they have access to early funds if needed. Yeah. So that's how the system works. Well, I might sound very basic, but again, the supply chain finance on the paper looks very good, and there is definitely a lot of benefits behind it. But I do believe there are a few basic principles that needs to be in place before we talk about the supply chain finance, right? First of all, the obvious elephant in the room, the commission, right? So as a commission, and the percentage is determined by the credit rating of the buyer's organization, essentially it should be cheaper than what the supplier can access through the bank or for the immediate for the immediate needs, right? Then it is attractive. If the credit rating, say, of the buyer organization is much lower than the supplier is much bigger organization, this might not be interesting for them. This might be essentially for them, which means the cost of capital is much cheaper going outside on the market than doing it through your supply chain finance. However, there might be some situation in which, even if, okay, obviously if not the very big gap, even if it's more expensive to do it through your supply chain finance facility, the supplier might still willing to consider. And that would be, say, for example, if there is a certain leverage ratios that supplier needs to adhere to, or might be as a specific region where the cost of financing, even if overall organization is big, but in specific region, the access to funding might be a little bit more challenging. So this term still somehow can be negotiated. Yeah? What's for me even more basic, but even more crucial is, again, going back to our previous discussion, do you have your accounts payable procure to pay process fixed? Are you paying your suppliers like a clock on time? And if this process is efficient? Because just to give you example from our illustration, right? Let's assume that you have this 120 days that you negotiated. So if your process is inefficient and you actually approve the invoice for payment on the 119th day, right, is a very different than when you approve it on a day 2. Yeah, for supplier in the former situation, there is no benefit of the supply chain finance. Yeah, because he will have essentially only 1 day to access the funds, which doesn't make any difference, right? So again, very basic, but it really needs to work well, yeah, before we start putting on the top of it complexity of supply chain finance. And again, with the current tools, with the current processes, and a lot in the current ERP system, it is it is possible to I mean, for the accounts payable process work, you know, like a clock. It's a standard process of any organization. But again, where your process is not yet there, I would first probably focus on fixing the process, which has also other benefits that we discussed before, and then going to the supply chain finance.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, from a practitioner's perspective, these things don't come out that easily, right? I mean, if someone approves it on the 119th day, I mean, within 1 day, how can anyone even avail finance? I mean, that absolutely makes makes sense. Get the basics right. So, just one point, you know, if you could elaborate, Anna, you know, you had mentioned this commission part, you know, just for the benefit of audience, if you can, because it's a bit technical. So, if you can simplify it even further and elaborate a bit further, that would
it's an
be
interest
helpful.
it's an interest that bank charges on the payment.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
And the size of this interest will depend on the riskiness of your organization, of the buyer organization. So the more risky the organization is, the higher this interest.
Higher the interest rate. So you're saying if the supplier's credit rating is better than yours, and if the supplier can get a better financing option elsewhere than through your system, then it won't be an incentive for the supplier to tap into that system. So that's the point you are trying to make.
Yes.
Okay, that again another very interesting insight that can come only from a practitioner. So okay, moving on. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there have been quite a few new trends in supply chain finance, and I mean you're very much aware of it. And one of the new trends that I'm seeing currently in the market is linking sustainability targets and SEF. You know, in fact, there have been some really top CPG companies. They have a well-functioning, well-oiled supply chain finance program that has linked a supplier's sustainability target. You know how they move in those targets with the financing need. You know, so that I think they do better. They get a better financing option, etc. So, any thoughts on this?
I think it's a great idea. I think it can work amazingly to promote the sustainability agenda, because that's kind of links a risk and a reward in a very close proximity, right? So the supplier, instead of having in a way just a discussion on whether or not we share the same sustainability value, here there is a very material price and very material award attached to it, which encourages suppliers go an extra mile and actually do get and adopt the same values on sustainability as your organization. Again, I can see how it can work. It works very well, say, in the more mature markets, and where sustainability agenda has been, sort of a cornerstone of many discussions. Say, for example, Europe, where sustainability is very, very high on the agenda for the last, I think, more than almost 2 decades, and where procurement profession has been evolved a lot around this topic. In other markets, more emerging markets, particularly not as mature on the sustainability, it's still, I think, work in progress. Say, for example, for us in the Middle East, one of the biggest challenges that we see of linking it, while there are some banking organization who offer this scheme, and we are looking very closely into this, because Chalhoub does have a very strong sustainability commitment, particularly around the social values, as well as we do have net zero commitment by 2040. So it's really sort of significant importance. It's still, for example, finding the objective benchmark, or how you measure sustainability progress or sustainability adherence to sustainability values of your suppliers is still very challenging. Like, for example, EcoVadis, right? EcoVadis has a very low coverage in the Middle East, right? So there is not really this objective benchmark, say, for example, that you might have in other regions, where you say, okay, that's exactly how I'm going to rank, and that's how I'm going to link my supply chain finance or any other scheme for this reason to the sustainability targets and the progress of my suppliers. What we usually do, and therefore what ourselves and other companies do in this region, we do have our own kind of, at the moment, sustainability score matrices, which measure basically certain development and sort of ranking of our suppliers versus the key principles, that sustainability principles that we have. And based on the ranking of the suppliers, we do also tap into the idea of linking if you encourage suppliers of rank. We have ABC suppliers that rank A and B, say, to give them access to the supply chain finance. Yeah, particularly it's very important, I think, and very interesting for the small and medium-sized businesses. Right? I mean, I think global organizations do have already quite advanced sustainability programs in place, but this is essentially encouragement for small and medium size.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Okay. I think we are done with the discussion, so we can open it up for audience Q&A. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So here is our first question. This is from Stephen Wilkins. Hi, Stephen. So Stephen asks you, Anna, do you plan to connect the upstream, that is sourcing/contract, with downstream, that is P2P?
Yes, absolutely. That's actually our next step in terms of our procurement transformation. The only reason what's hold us back, we're trying to align it with our ERP strategy, because also our ERP, in terms of our strategic priorities, this is something that we are looking and undertaking exercise to change. So essentially, we want to invest in the P2P part along with the ERP side, because AP is fully integrated, as you know, in the ERP. So it needs to be something that makes sense to overall organization. Plus, the other point which cannot be underestimated is the change management effort, right? So that's the reason, again, why we're trying to link it with ERP, because P2P is in a way transversal process that cuts across all stakeholders, touches all stakeholders. So coordinating the P2P change management, and then on the top of it, ERP change management might be, sort of can cause this implementation fatigue and change management fatigue. So, I mean, even from this standpoint of view, we're trying to kind of align our efforts, say, with tech and finance in order to be able to do it in most effective way for our stakeholders.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Thanks, Stephen, for that question. Next question is from Dachi Gunya Shivli. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. So this is the question: how procurement can monetize savings when changing payment terms? For example, if I spend 1 million with the supplier and I renegotiated from 30 to 60 days payment terms, what will be my savings?
Your savings would be a free cash flow. And then again, it's not going to be directly, and that's where it's so critical and important for procurement also to understand the finance terms. So what's going to happen? Your money will work much. You will need to pay much less frequently, basically, to your suppliers, which means you can have access to your money, and that's the funds times the rate that you could have, right? It will be your free cash flow release, right? So again, it will not hit the P&L directly, but there are a lot of models that can actually calculate for you. You put the spend, you put the improvement of payment terms from 30 to 60, and you put your interest rate to your cost of financing. So you can actually go back to your finance with a very clear figure of how much of free cash flow you delivered.
Yeah, can you explain the concept of free cash flow? And I mean,
free cash flow,
yeah.
Essentially free cash flow, meaning that essentially something, I mean, it's almost like literally how it sounds, something that you will not need immediately, right? Something that you are freed from your working capital cycle, which means it's ready to be either reinvested or get under their say bank in a bank and earn the certain interest, right?
That's correct. Yeah, correct. Next question is from Apurva Gutukade. So Apurva says, thank you for insightful session. How can sustainability and profitability can go hand in hand? That's a very good question, because there are some theories, there are some alternate hypotheses, there are some big investors, especially in the US, who say ESG,
the triple bottom line. Yeah, so I'm not very well versed in a triple bottom line subject, but it is in fact. There is actually, you actually probably from your previous life you know better, there is a whole host of their funds that would invest only in the companies with a strong sustainability agenda. And because statistically it has been shown that the companies with a strong sustainability agenda in the long term deliver much higher returns than the companies without this agenda. So and I think since I followed it, this theory has developed significantly, and I don't remember how much, what is the size of the market, meaning the funds or the assets under management of the funds, that of these sustainability funds that invest only in the high sustainability agenda companies, but we're talking about trillions at the moment. Yeah. So there is now, actually, you can quantify this link.
Yeah, that's correct. So next question. Yeah, 1 second. Sorry, my screen just froze. Yeah, next question is from Lisa Morton. Is it in your plan to encompass direct sourcing in your organization?
Yes and no. Okay, we are luxury basically the nature of the company, we are retail, so and we are luxury distributors over very specific brands. So when it comes to the direct procurement, the direct procurement is like it's a little bit more specific than, for example, in a manufacturing company, right? We buy and sell. This is more on the buyers, like a buyers and merchandisers. And while, say, for example, in groceries, it's easier. You're a category manager for a specific food category or specific clothes category. When it comes to luxury, it's a little bit more, I would say, sophisticated. So there are certain things that we are tapping in terms of the consulting on their negotiations in terms of the payment terms, volumes, and so on and so forth. But I see it much more gradual process, and primarily because we do have a type of business related to distribution, they can see probably more feasibility of actually conducting procurement activities than, for example, in high fashion. Yeah, high fashion is a very, very specific industry.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, we didn't discuss your company much in detail. So Chalhoub is
Yeah.
basically a very well-renowned luxury retailer in the Middle East. So, you distribute some of the top perfume, top brands across
Yes.
the region,
Yes,
right,
across
Anna? I
GCC.
mean,
Right. So we operate in the 12 countries. We are very much into luxury. We distribute in more than 300 brands, high-end brands, but also we have about 8 brands which are our own. And again, for our own brands, yes, direct procurement might make sense, but again, this is more. I think we still have quite a lot of opportunities in our indirect spend.
Okay, that's great. Next question is from Julio Cardona. How do you deal with the complexity to explain or understand the gap between what is in budget versus cost avoidance to negotiate and avoid the impact on the business? Many times we have an aggressive budget, uh, but realistic. So basically, they're saying they may have an aggressive budget versus macroeconomic reality. So how do you deal with this? How do you deal with such complexity and understand the gap between what is in budget versus cost avoidance? I hope my question
I
is
think
clear.
so. Just like again, just to be clear on the terms. The cost avoidance is what I mean. What's in classical sense of this terms is that, say, for example, when you do not have a certain benchmark, right, on your spend, because it's, say, for example, something one-off, or say, for example, the market freight freight, because it's a market, right? Or it goes up and down. When we had the disruption in the supply chain, I'm sure everyone noticed how the ocean freight shoot up, right? So you might have, no matter how good you are in negotiations, if the overall market doubled, even if you negotiate 2% or 3% versus the prior year, is going to be a huge increase, right? So what you're trying to show in terms of cost avoidance, saying, look, you would have paid this much, right? X amount, but because I negotiated, then it's still an increase, but we avoid it over, I don't know, X% or X million coming from here, right? What happens with the budget? And I agree with you, it's always a big discussion with the finance. Usually, the way that we determine the budgets is like, I want to see year-on-year decrease. Right. I mean, and then, and again, in the case of logistics, if the market moved on, no matter what cost avoidance you have, you will have a very unrealistic and aggressive target that you need to reduce cost on the market which is completely far away, right? So, and that's where I'm saying that where this joint forward-looking budgeting is so much important, right? Procurement is an absolute must for procurement to be involved in the budget and give the guidance where we see the logistic charges, for example. If again, if the market is moved again doubled, and it's absolutely unrealistic or short-sighted for finance or whoever's doing the budget to expect either the same cost or decrease. Yeah, and this needs to be, it's a discussion that needs to take place during the budget, and therefore that's why it's so important for procurement to have a seat at the table during these discussions.
Okay, so Anna, I have a question. So you've been, you're from LSE and you have you're a certified chartered accountant. So despite your strong knowledge in finance, do you face any difficulty in still convincing finance as to the procurement's contribution,
Of
or
course. I mean,
because
don't forget, I'm also
because
I'm also procurement, and I'm supposed to be very good in negotiations. But you know, a lot of times it is a challenge. It's a very, again, it's a very it's ongoing discussion, and that's why, you know, as any relationship, the most important thing is trust, right? So and this trust is built over time. It's not something that is like, you know, it's not a switch that you turn on and turn off. By only feeding into finance and feeding into you having this proactive relationship, eventually you will reach the point where when finance does the budget and procurement says, by the way, rates shoot up to 2 times, don't expect the same, finance will listen, right? But
okay.
it takes time. It's a relationship. It's, again, it's trust, as with any of your stakeholders.
Okay, so there has been a generational shift, right? I mean, there are a lot of companies, especially mid-size, small to mid-size companies, which are recognizing the value a professional procurement function can bring to the table. And there are quite a few out here, who may go on to take up that job, like you did. You set up the procurement function at Chalhoub, right? And of course, your story is a bit different. The company had existed for like 7 decades, but then your function is somewhat new, right? So but there could be cases where many of the people from the audience can go on to a new company which has recognized the value of procurement function, and then they may had that responsibility of setting up that function and then having to negotiate with finance. So any tips that you would like to give, cheat sheet kind of advice to them as to how to approach this whole complex issue?
Again, I think we come to the point, like, learn finance, at least basic things, right? Again, I mean, it definitely is not going to hurt you. If anything, it's going to help you a lot, you know, especially when you go to the strategic level, right? If in any organization now, and particularly say if you're CPO, or I mean, it doesn't really matter. Even if you want to be, if your aspiration to become a marketing person, knowledge of basic finance is extremely important. Then again, most importantly, like with any stakeholder, with the finance, build trust. Try to understand, like, I mean, we are procurement, yeah, we know how to negotiate, right? So try to understand what moves, where is the pain points of finance, and and demonstrate how procurement can help these pain points, right? It's not move on from ours and yours to from yours and mine to ours. How I can, what's your problem, how can I contribute to it? And as long as you speak the same language, you demonstrate that you have exactly the same targets, I mean, the conversation will be much easier. Yeah. But try not to take it very defensively, because I also notice a lot of times procurement feels, which is again, I've been in this situation many times, unappreciated, because your guys, I mean, you claiming, you're making all these claims of a fantastic savings, but I don't see anything from that. So is having this ability to sort of understand, and hopefully I kind of explained that they see it with a completely different lens than you are, and educating them on what exactly on 360, given the 360 views of what procurement does. Include your finance in negotiations. I mean, as many times as I, for example, had financial analysts or anyone from finance from negotiations, in any critical negotiations, it's a completely different understanding afterwards. Right? It just make it transparent. Again, by the end of the day, the more transparent you are, the more trust and the development, the relationship you might have. You will
Well,
have, not might
that's
have.
yeah, that's wonderful, Anna. I think we are almost run out of time.
Sure.
Anyway, I think so. Thank you so much, Anna. That was a wonderful exposition on the importance of procurement and finance collaboration. This marks the end of our session. A big thank you to all the participants for logging in today and for asking questions and posting comments. And we will be sharing the webinar recording link with all of you soon. Please do reach out to the email address on the Q&A box. My team has posted that email address. on the Q&A box, that is contact us at bero-inc.com. If you have any additional questions, this marks the end of our session. Thank you and have a good day. And to all those in Asia, good night.
Thank you very much. Hope it was useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.